Hey guys, this is Hell Hades. This is a Raid Shadow Legends video. Okay guys, I've had a load of questions on Titus and I just wanted to clarify like a whole bunch of rules for building this dude out. I've seen people in the comments basically saying, you know, I've built my Titus out. It doesn't seem to do the damage that I've seen other people's do. And they're not sure if it's because of their Titus build or the champions they're using alongside him or a whole bunch of stuff. So I just figured I'd go through some rules of building this dude because there's actually a bunch of nuance which even I didn't know until I was streaming the other day and a whole bunch of the chat was coming in saying, oh, why don't you try this? Did you know this? And a bunch of the things I actually didn't realize. So if I don't realize it, then there's probably a decent chance some of you guys don't realize it as well. And the cool thing actually is most of these were picked up by the HH gaming team, just hadn't flown through to me. So that's fair enough. Right, let me share with you a couple of things. So few rules about building Titus himself. Pretty much all we're doing for damage is trying to build out a way to use this A2 skill as often as we can when we've got a Mahusive shield on us. Okay, so ideally, you want to be getting back to the A2 more frequently. There's only a couple of ways to do that in the game. So you can either do that with someone that does like reset your skill type abilities. So, you know, for the recent Hydra run I did, I had Yumiko in my team. First time I was actually building Yumiko out for a fight. And, you know, she's got the ability to reset skills. So Yumiko was doing that. I've also got champions like Lamasu, someone that we can go and grab. But yeah, ultimately, I've seen Cruson do a fun video where he just used a bunch of pain keepers. But ultimately, it's like, how often can we get back to the A2? So you can do it with champions, but you can also do it with gear sets, right? So one of the best gear sets that you could put on this guy is Merciless. And there's a decent reason for that. So firstly, if you get to 4 pieces, you've got a 30% chance to decrease a random skill's cooldown by 1 turn when you do any damage. Right, when dealing damage. If you get 6 pieces, you also get ignore defense. We'll talk about that in a second, but reducing the cooldown is really important. And obviously, whenever you do any A1 skill, you will do damage. So what you want to make sure you're doing if you're going with that type of strat is just turning off any other skill that's got a cooldown. So for me, I always just turn off his A3 here, also because I don't want him ally protecting someone, because I'll be reducing the size of my shield when he takes damage or when they take damage, but mainly because I only want this skill to be focused for the Merciless gear. Now, if you're not like later game, I saw some people saying, but I'm an earlier game player. You could use Reflex gear, right? You could use Reflex gear and get the same 4-piece set, cooldown skills type of vibe, but you do lose a decent amount of damage if you go into Reflex. So, do I even have any Reflex? I must have. Oh, here you go. So Reflex has got a 40% chance to reduce a cooldown. So that's better than Merciless for getting back to your A2. But you're not going to have the ignore defense mechanics. For Clan Boss, by the way, ignore defense mechanics, it doesn't matter a lot because the Clan Boss really doesn't have a lot of defense. You will lose out on some damage, but I would say Reflex gear is actually perfectly fine to use if you're trying to use him on a Clan Boss build. Now let's talk about his A2 because this is one of the areas where I had no kind of like recollection of this. So a couple of things. Firstly, this attack is always a crit if this champion's under a shield. Okay, I'd completely forgotten about this line of text. And it's so important because you can build him so easy, right, to get your damage away. All you need is to get him at the speed that you want. You want as much defense and crit damage as you can get. Okay, and this leads me on to my second point. If I just look at this skill on the screen, I'm like, okay, so he gets damage boost equal to the value of his shield. Its damage is based on defense and HP. So I'm thinking, okay, I just want to make sure that, you know, my Wixwell or my Brogni are building his shield really big. And then I just want to give him a good balance of defense and HP and crit damage. It's actually not the case. So if we go onto hellhades.com and look at the way this skill is kind of like set up to do damage, the actual way it is done is a multiplier of your defense times by your shield value divided by HP. It's not what it reads like, okay? The more HP you have got, the less damage you do. It's a huge thing that this does not portray at all on the screen right now. It's a huge thing. And what that also means is I've done something which I wish I hadn't done. I bought his blessing at 1 star and then 2 star because I wanted to build him stronger. All I've done as a legendary champion is given myself a load of HP that I can't get rid of, which is really annoying. I've got 7.5k extra HP on my build, which is hurting my build right now. And I don't believe I can just change. I can't just take it off. I can't take off a blessing. So yeah, so that sucks, honestly. You don't get value of a blessing until you hit 4 star, apparently. That's what I've been told. When you hit 4 star and the crit damage comes in as well, that tips the scales in your favor. And then you start to get more damage with like the buff, the increased buff damage plus the crit damage tips it in your favor. I think it's 4, it might even be 5 star that you start to get a benefit. And at 6 star, you definitely get a good benefit. But it's interesting, right? So firstly, you don't want to be building him with HP in your build. And if you look here, so I need to change my build actually since I built this one out for that Hydra run, because I've got an HP amulet on, mainly because it's merciless gear. Okay, I wanted the 6 pieces. But yeah, I actually don't have HP really. I've got a bit of HP here maybe. I don't have a lot of HP in my build at all, but I want to rebuild him now and try and get as little HP as I can, because it's going to change the amount that he can hit for. That's a really important one. Don't need crits. Yeah, you want to get as low HP as possible, high defense, high crit damage. That's all you need. The other cool thing is his A2, his provoke, cannot be resisted if he's under a shield, which he has to be worthwhile. So you don't even need accuracy on his build. Like, it's so easy to build in terms of stat requirements that it makes him super easy. You could also run him relatively slow compared to the rest of your team, you know, like 200 odd speed or whatever, and you know, he'll still get all of that work done. So really, really interested in terms of how you need to build him out. I've built mine with Helm Smasher because I want to try and ignore defense as much as I can. So I've got Merciless Gear for the ignore defense. I've got Helm Smasher for the chance to proc ignore defense. And then I've also run Cat's Gaze here for ignoring defense plus crit damage. Okay, so ignoring defense is really important. Unlike some other champions, like unlike the Cadaver back in the day who used to do damage based on shield, you didn't need to worry about things like defense mechanics. Titus does follow the rules of the game. Okay, you do need, his damage will go up based on things like decreased defense being out there, weaken being out there, you know, using champions like, I don't know, Bad Elves are possible, who boosts your damage with your hits. You know, there's a whole bunch of them, right? So he does follow the rules of the game, and you know, decreasing the defense of enemies and empowering his defense both boost that damage of the A2, even though mainly the damage flips to crazy because of the shield. Yeah, but you do need the multiplier of defense multiplied by the shield divided by HP. Okay, so the defense, and then obviously then that multiplies by the crit damage. So all of the normal like laws of the game actually do conform with this guy. So it's just worth knowing that in terms of how you're going to build him out. Now let's talk about his partners, right? So for those who have not really built these before, Wixwell is his best ally. And the reason for that is because Wixwell can grow a shield to a crazy number relatively quickly, much quicker and much easier than Brogni can. So how do you grow shields with Wixwell? You need as many buffs on your champs as possible. So definitely on Titus, wants to be like buff heavy. And then you want to use his A2 as much as you can. You obviously need to make sure that buffs don't fall off of your champ. So you need, really in most teams, you need 3 people that are doing a buff extender, okay? And ideally, they're on a 3-turn cooldown to make it easier to do. Now, with Wixwell, it's all about building him to have chances to cool down his A2, okay? And get this out there as often as you can. So, again, I probably would open with the A3. We give our Titus increased defense, which is brilliant. That's going to boost his damage. And then we just want to be A2 in as often as we can. Okay, so that's the kind of like basics of Wixwell. Keep him alive. Make sure he's fast in your team. And for me here, I've got him in both Reflex and Merciless Gear, 4 pieces of each, so that I've got the highest possible chance to get my A2 back as frequently as possible. Okay. And that's the main thing with Wixwell that you need to kind of think about. The other thing with Wixwell is the bigger the base shield, the faster he gets things going. So it's really important to have a big fat shield at the start of your fight. I rebuilt my Yumiko the other day and just threw her in a big shield set. I don't know if she's going to end up being my shield set champion, but for the stream, I was like, big HP and shield set. Therefore, I've got a big fat shield to start with. We then cast Wixwell's shield on his A3 at the start of the fight. And then you've got 2 shields that Wixwell is continuously growing. The bigger the starting shield, it's much easier to stop you failing a run. So if you're a lower level player, for example, then I would suggest you might have 2 or even 3 of your team that start with a shield set to give yourself the momentum to get going. Okay. Now, some of the other things that you want to look out for with any of these kind of like, I guess, buff extender teams. Hydra, if you've got low resistance, they're just going to eat away at your champion's abilities. So you want to watch out for that. And on Clan Boss, really Clan Boss is just a case of, did I have a big enough starting shield for Wixwell to get going on? And have I got enough refresh champions in there to make sure that they don't fall off? One other thing that you definitely need to do is make sure that for Hydra, your Titus is not the highest crit damage champion. Okay, and again, I made this mistake on one of my runs. 334%. I had to bring someone into the run alongside him that had higher crit damage because they're going to be the target of the first person that's going to be eaten. After the first eat, it's totally random. Okay, and I don't think there's a way to stop it being random. It's just pure luck as to whether or not Titus gets chosen to be the target for the next eat. Okay, so you just want to make sure, well, what I found, because I ramped up my damage quite quick, I was able to get through to like, I don't know, I was already at like 1 billion damage on hard before the second person even got chosen to be eaten. Okay, and in the end, I think Titus maybe was the 3rd or 4th after about 700 turns in the round, and Titus got eaten. I did manage to get Titus back out, and I got my shield growing again, but it was negligible damage compared to the first 700 turns before Titus was eaten. So you can keep on, and you'd be extremely lucky for Titus to never be eaten in a whole Hydra run. So that's just something to watch out for. Now, spoken about Wixwell, the other partner in crime for this guy is Brogni. And Brogni is way harder to build than Wixwell. Okay, and the teams generally are a bit harder to deal with. It's the same vibe. You need to have 3 buff extenders alongside the team, which means that, you know, Wixwell is one of those, which means you only need 2 more. With Brogni, you need Brogni plus 3, okay, which means it's harder to do, right? Because you've got less space to get it done. The other thing with Brogni is, so you can start with Brogni's A3, get the shield out there. You never want an A3 again because you're buff extending. So he'll give you a shield. You still want the shield set because that's still your 2 shields. And it'll give you block debuffs and it'll give you increased attack, which maybe for some others in the team are useful. They're not useful for Titus. I guess the block debuffs is for like a clan boss run. The reason why Brogni is much harder to build is because his shield growth is all about how hard he hits. It's all about his damage to grow the shield. So the shield growth is still on a 3-turn cooldown. Ideally, you would still build him with something like probably 6-piece Merciless gear because you want the cooldown of his A2 as often as you can, and you want to ignore defense on his hits. Okay, but he's way more difficult to build because you've got to be crit capped, you've got to have tons of crit damage, you want to boost his attack as much as possible, you might even want some accuracy to land his burn. Like, there's a ton of stuff that you want in his build to make him grow shields fast. And that's hard to do because obviously you're basically building him as a full DPS. Much harder to do. Ignore his A3 shield element. This is not what he's about. He is about growing the shield with more damage. And you'll see here in Masteries, I've actually gone for Flawless Execution, which is just kind of like a do more damage type of hits. I've gone for Heaven Cast, which means that I do more damage from my hits. Mine's only a 3-star. I'd love him to be a 4-star, honestly. I've got an item which does more damage. Like, there's just everything I'm doing is about how can I do more damage with my hits as possible. Like, that's all I'm trying to do. So that's definitely one to watch out for. And don't forget, his damage scales from attack. even though his shield scales from HP, all of his damage scales from attack. So high attack, high crit damage, obviously the right speed for whatever tune you're doing, and then ignore defense mechanics will help you as well. Ideally, as I say, 6-piece Merciless would be the way to go on this guy, because then you've got the chance to cool down your A2 as frequently as you can as well. But he's the other guy who can enable Titus. I've seen one other way for Hydra to enable Titus without Brogni, without Wixwell, and that is a video from Bronco just using blood shield accessories. I would just say, like, tread with caution on this one, because I mean, blood shield, firstly, extremely novel and amazing way to try and get it done, right? So I've got to call out Bronco for that. Really, really cool. But it's much harder to do, like way harder to do. So blood shield gives you shield of 5% of your damage. So if you're wearing 3 pieces of blood shield, that's 15% of your damage comes back as a shield. So the way Bronco was doing it, and you should go and check out his videos, he's got really cool videos on this stuff. He was waiting for that moment when, you know, there was already like an exposed head. His Titus was built crazy high damage, yeah, and he basically went out there and smacked like a severed head, which had drop defense and weaken, and, you know, I think he might have had someone like Firo on his team as well to boost his damage. There's a whole bunch of conditions, right? But when he hit that severed head, smacked it with the A2, he smacked it for still millions of damage, like a ton of damage, and it built him a big shield. He then reset the abilities of his team, so he used that big shield to create another big shield. And basically, as I say, extremely novel way of doing it. You'll still get like millions of damage. You won't get billions of damage, right? So it's an interesting way to do it, but yeah, probably unrealistic for most of us in terms of like gear requirements plus other champion requirements. So really, if you don't have the Brogni and Wixwell, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to get stuff done. Now, obviously, everything I'm talking about here, ignore defense, building stats, all that type of stuff, you can empower your area bonuses. Like most of my area bonuses go into Hydra. And you can see here, I do minimal amounts of live PvP. I do not enjoy live PvP. And also it opens a sucky time for me to get it done. So I just don't really partake unless I'm trying to do stuff like Marius missions. But, you know, already, like, I wish I could delete some of the HP that I've built in here. I would suggest most people want to try and go for things like the ignore defense mechanics, because it's so valuable in the game. Yeah, if I could go higher without needing all the gold stuff, I would. So you can see what people are trying to build out is exactly what you should be building out as well. Just trying to ignore defense, probably, and crit damage. They're the two things that it's quite hard to get. But ignore defense is this is the only place where you can get it, other than through like gear sets and, you know, interesting, hard to get relics and stuff like that. So this is definitely the place to come and sort of, you know, try and push your stats. Okay, and then I guess the last question I'm going to try and answer here is, does he need a nerf, right? Because obviously you're seeing a lot of content about this guy. The reason being, he is basically at this point one of a kind. And one of a kinds that were a fusion are extremely interesting. Okay, they're extremely interesting, and you can do some pretty crazy stuff with this guy on clan bosses. So he still is not the hardest damage comp for something like Hydra, right? Trunda still holds that mantle, which means that if you're going to nerf this guy, surely the question is, should I then also nerf the other anomaly in the game, right? I guess the difference is this guy can turn it on way easier than Trunda can. Trunda has to have very specific champs alongside her. She needs incredible gear to turn it on, whereas this guy turns it on a lot easier. I think he might get a small nerf. I hope he doesn't, actually. I think, you know what? The game's in a place now, there's so many overpowered parts to the game. A lot of the game is kind of like done anyway in terms of content, with tons of ways to beat it. Like, there's not... The game's quite old at this point, right? It's been beaten in a number of ways. Clan boss is basically irrelevant content unless you're a new player, and even then, to find one of the ways to beat it easily, there's a lot of them, so it's just easier to find them nowadays. Hydra and Chimera are not just kind of like dead content, I'd say, but they're pretty well known already. This guy makes loads of like interesting comps happen. I think if they were to do anything, it would just be, if we go back to the hellhades.com multiplier, you could just slim one of these numbers a touch, and then his damage goes down a chunk, right? So if you turn this, instead of a 5.5 multiplier of the shield. If that was a 4 multiplier of the shield, he would still do colossal damage. He would still be himself as a champion. All of his mechanics still make a lot of sense, but you would have just nerfed his damage by whatever, like 20%, 25% or something. So if they do anything, I hope it's that. I hope they don't try and change the makeup of this champion with a nerf, because they've said they wouldn't, firstly. They've also said they wouldn't nerf him, but anything can happen, obviously, in a game. If he belittles most of the game, then obviously someone who does that needs a nerf. He actually doesn't. I've seen him one-shot Fire Knight. I've seen him one-shot Spider and stuff like that, but actually only with tons of setup. Like I was trying something out the other day for Spider Hard, thinking, oh, this would be a fun video. And this really was following like what I'd seen from Bronco, honestly, doing a one-shot all bosses type of video, which again, super fun. Actually, I don't want him as the lead. This is a mistake I was making when I made this video, right? I'm thinking more HP means more damage. It doesn't. It means less damage. No way do I want him as the lead. I want you as the lead. I want more defense. So yeah, what I was trying to do here was basically build a team, or see if I could build a team that would just one-shot the Spider, using Titus as the kind of like target. So you know, drop defense and weaken on all of the Spiderlings. I would then bring Sir Nick in to do a crazy A2 high-powered shield. So give myself an initial massive shield. Now I'm wondering if maybe I got a better chance if I had a shield set on as well, but I then go A2 with Wixwell, like growing the size of the shield. And then I would go A2 with Brogni, growing the size of the shield and killing a bunch of Spiderlings. And then the idea was, oh, maybe this guy is just going to be able to pop the main Spider on his next hits. And I thought that could be a fun video. I was just like, this would be a fun video. And I thought, bam, that might just get it done. Obviously nowhere near, right? So, and that's why I didn't pursue it. So if he could do stuff like that, then I think he's more in the nerf camp. But, you know, any of the stuff which I've seen him do, like he hits hard anyway. He hits hard for a PvP battle. He hits hard against bosses, but not really broken until you really set up that shield growth. So I think he's not in the nerf camp unless they are really just worried about the sheer volume of damage he does in Chimera and Hydra. That's the only place where he might be under question. But, you know, we raised that with them right before he was released, and they were like, no, he seems fine. So nothing's changed. Like, nothing's changed. We raised right before he's released. Have you seen the silly damage he's already doing? And they were like, yeah, it's as intended. So maybe it's just going to stay as he is. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned a few things as well. And I'll see you in the next one.